Hello, welcome to Beneath the Sangres. I'm your host, Douglas Beechwood, and with me today is Marika Popovits, artist extraordinaire, and you've made your home here in the San Luis Valley, Crestone specifically, for many years now.
Yes, well over 20. I think I'm one of the oldies. In more ways than one.
Marika, it's such a pleasure to talk with you today. Your art is a beautiful inspiration. And I've had some visits with you at your home and studio. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the inspiration for how you approach painting, the vision of light, of luminosity itself.
Mm-hmm. I'd be happy to, of course, because it has been my main focus since I was, I would say, probably in my mid-20s. When I realized that what I really wanted to paint was not an object itself, or not objects, not the visible world, but the space in which it arises. So the interrelationship between objects and the space in which they find themselves is extremely intimate and ultimately one. So the space and the objects are indivisible. And that was an enormous leap in consciousness for me. I was in my early 20s, and that totally changed the way I painted. And from then on, it was all about seeing within and not without. So I began to see inside objects, like mountains and nature and whatever. And that led to a lot of other later developments until I began to understand that what I was actually after was to understand the nature of consciousness matter, because consciousness and matter are one and the same in two different forms. And so soon after that, or maybe not so soon, because by the time I had a really powerful breakthrough, I was just about 60. So in the meantime, the 40 years prior to that were preparations for this breakthrough. And the breakthrough then allowed me to actually see beyond seeing, really seeing with the inner eye and perceiving the interrelationships of such elements as light, sound, vibration, frequencies, and patterns, which are all the building blocks of matter and consciousness.
Well, and it's striking the similarities when I look at some of your paintings, the similarities to what some of the photos that have come out of the Large Hadron Collider of quarks spiraling off. Mm-hmm. You know, and strictly in artistic terms, you know, you might be put into the genres of abstractionism or maybe even impressionism. But what you're telling me is that this is really reality.
Mm-hmm. It's very much reality, and I have a deep connection and have had since my mid-20s to physics, especially astrophysics and nuclear physics, through a friend who was a brilliant physicist with the Max Planck Institute in Munich. And and some of the experiences I had related very much to the work that he had done. And so he enlightened me about a lot of these things that I was experiencing in terms of the scientific correlation, you know. And so I began to understand that much of what I was seeing was actually what quantum physics is basing its precepts on, many of them, which actually depends very much on the observer and the interaction between the observer and the object itself. But what I saw was actually the building block elements of creation, such as what is the nature of light, what is the nature of frequency and sound, and how they interrelate to create a physical, physically visible reality. Mm. So yes, my paintings look abstract, but they depict a reality.
Well, tell me a little bit about what inspires you to continue in this genre, to follow that intuitive, spiritual inner insight Is it part to place? Is it part to space? Is it part to, a long-standing inspiration that's driven you?
I definitely don't think it had anything to do with the space in which it was happening. It influences it, of course. It influences the quality of the light and the energy, but it's not dependent on that at all. It's entirely dependent on the depths of meditation that in which they reveal themselves. And these all come out of very deep states of meditation and long, long, long hours of silence. And above all, and this has been very crucial in my life, for more than 40 years, I've chosen to live a very secluded life. Both in Italy, where I lived for many years in Tuscany, quite far away from the cities, and the same in Colorado. I chose Crestone primarily because of its people and the spirit and the spirituality that it practiced in its numerous organizations here. And so my relationship is much more to the people here than it is to the actual environment. As much as I love it, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the people. And so the paintings are actually a result of pretty much a lifelong quest for what exactly are we and why are we here and what is our purpose. And it started very early as a child, and then it really took leaps and bounds as I got a little older.
Well, I recall talking to you in your studio, and we'll show some cuts of that later on in the show, about your inspiration really began at the age of 6.
6, yeah.
You've been formally working as an artist.
Well, my father started to teach me when I was 6.
Yeah.
And pretty audacious, I must say, because he gave me as a 6-year-old a book on anatomy and sat me down and said, I want you to copy this Raphael nude here exactly the way it is, and I'll show you how to do it. And he showed me how to do it in the correct proportions and how to copy proportions, like this, Of course, the results had nothing to do with Raphael, I have to say. But and then soon after that, he taught me linear perspective, and that was quite a leap as well.
At that young age?
At 7.
Excellent.
By the time I was 7, and from then on, I had to draw every space I entered. I had to draw in perfect linear perspective. One single point, however, single point.
Everything converging on the vanishing point.
Exactly. So once, yeah. So that was fun, and but by the time I was 11, he stopped teaching me, and he said, "Go for it, do what you had to do." And that was quite a leap, because there were many things that I had no idea how to do. And I remember looking at a piece of paper, terrified. Now, how am I ever going to paint that landscape? But it took a leap, and I like challenges.
I can relate to the intimidation of a blank canvas.
Oh, yes. Especially when you're young and not yet experienced. Yes.
That's and I think at this point in the show we would cut and show some of what we did in the other interview, and then I'm just envisioning coming back from that, and then talking a little bit more specifically about the valley. So I know you let it in. Space doesn't necessarily affect it, although light, and obviously we've seen your studio and how much the space and the place and the placement of the walls to act as easels is I think tantamount to the level of quality you've achieved in your most recent artworks. But tell me a little bit more about the inspiration that can come from a place that is still and spacious and quiet, like we have here in the North.
I must say that it is such a unique place, this valley and this remote little township of Crestone, because it's at the directly at the foothills of these sacred mountains that have been considered sacred for aeons, millennia, and the energy that these mountains have and exude, and their impact and their influence, spiritual influence on those who live here, is profound. So the reason I'm actually here is ultimately the energy of this place. And I felt it in the people very much. I felt it in the place itself. And not because of the beauty of the mountains, which Colorado has many beautiful mountains and many
Well, you've, of course,
beautiful
traveled the
valleys.
world. You've lived in Hungary and Australia
Yes,
and Europe.
Yes, all over Asia and South America. I've traveled all over. And there are magnificent, and also sacred places all over the world. I could have chosen to live in Maya land, or I could have chosen to live in Peru, or I could have chosen to live in Egypt, and all of these places I loved, in India. But there is a quality of Crestone specifically that has a lot to do with the enormous respect that was felt and shown by the founders of Crestone, Hannah and Maurice Strong, that inspired them to create all of these spiritual centers here, to coexist and collaborate in one area. And that inspiration led to what is Crestone, and that is the energy that is so present here, and that I feel so strongly. And I don't feel it elsewhere. It's very, very, very potent here. And it's the activities of these spiritual centers, it's their life dedications to their own quest, their spiritual journeys, the variety of people who are here practicing that, and the variety of means with which they express it. I think it's really unique.
Mm.
And, you can imagine that I chose to actually come here instead of living in my beloved Tuscany, in the hills of Tuscany, between Siena and Florence, in the most ideal place, also very isolated and alone. I chose to leave that and come to Crestone. That is saying a lot. That is saying a lot. And I've been living here since, I think, pretty much on and off since 1998. By on and off, I mean I lived here like 3 months a year, and 3 months a year in Italy, and 3 months a year in India. This was while I was doing a lot of traveling and also teaching. And then I decided to really, or it decided for me that it's better that I don't travel so much, that I should just stay here and paint.
Yeah.
And only paint, and not paint while I'm traveling. And that resulted in an enormous production that actually started in 2000. And it culminated, came to a much larger apex than around 2010, so about 15 years ago.
Well, and we've seen some of the body of work, and we'll continue to show some images as we talk here, in the edit, that is.
Good.
Tell me a little bit, if you can tell me some now that the body of work in your now that the body of work has been completed, that you've been striving to complete for all these years, what is your vision? You have a vision of a gallery space. Tell me a little bit about this.
Yes, well, first of all, about 13 years ago, I met and became very close friend to James O'Dea, who also kind of withdrew from his very active activist life as a director of Institute of Noetic Sciences, and began his own quiet inner journey. And when we found each other, or better said, he found the paintings, and he began to connect to the paintings at a deep level. And at some point around 2013, he asked me whether he could sit with some of these paintings and see what comes. And what came were these incredibly beautiful verbal interpretations of the very essence of each painting, not the depiction of it, but their inner core, their essence.
So James, as a poet,
James
is
a very fine poet. He has 3 books that he has written. The most recent one is more in a poetic form than prose. And but he writes these invocations. He calls them invocations, which can be quite long and describe actually the process of each painting and what their purpose is, their communication. So that resulted in 4 books, that
Right.
3 of which we collaborated on. The first one was on my own. And now that is done, and I've now completed a large series of 25, 22 paintings that are now going to be they're envisioned to come to be housed in a private gallery space, quite large, that will be open to the public at times and on request and by appointment. And these paintings will find their permanent home in this building. And
Well, it maybe goes without mention that there's a collaboration between you and your husband.
oh yes, there's more than a collaboration. Without Bert's genius as an architect, none of this would be happening. And not the house that we have been living in for the last 15 years, but especially not this new vision. And this vision is definitely a visionary building, housing art that is really addressing the future of humanity, of who we are in the process of becoming. And that is exactly what the purpose of so many of these paintings has been over the years, and to discover the reason why we are in such a profound transition planetarily, and that is to really become a humanity that is driven equally by the heart as it is by the mind, and not so singularly by the mind. And so we're going to become a much more integral and integrated humanity, and that is what these paintings are pointing to. And they will be housed in a space that is also pointing to that. And it will not just be housing my paintings, but all art that is motivated by a similar vision and a similar purpose, and of which there are quite a number already that I know of. And we're hoping that it will be a place where people can come to do performances and do whatever kind of art form they wish to express, such as installations and video and all kinds of things. Always motivated by a similar vision of a humanity that is much more integrated and integral than we are currently, which we are, of course, going to be, because we don't really have any choice. Ultimately, we don't really have a choice, because that is the purpose of our human existence.
Well, you really make the argument for art as both a spiritual calling, as to both participate in creating and observing, communing with, and as activism.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my predecessor, I would say, is the great Vasily Kandinsky. When he wrote his book about the spiritual in art, that was in maybe 17, something like that, early in the century, and was revolutionary. And that is precisely what is still happening. I mean, unless we address the innermost being and the inner truth of everything that is, we're still very much only hovering on the surface of life.
Well, I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this question, because it goes for both an aspiring artist or an already working artist and an observer. And I'm a little bit on both sides. I have a degree in fine art and ended up moving away from painting and moving into photography. But I've always felt that art is a great way to communicate. Do you have any advice for artists on both the creating side and people that want to appreciate art from the observing side, that would help them approach not only your work, but to find the mystical thread in some of the great modern and current masters?
Well, I think the simplest way to actually formulate that is go beyond the surface, go beyond the appearance. seek to understand, above all, what is it that the artist or musician or dancer really is wanting to express. In other words, read between the lines and read between the shapes and read between everything that you see on the surface and go much deeper. And the experience you will have as an observer will be far more profound. And of course, as an artist, you will be coming to the very core of what is your creative impulse, the creative energy. That, that's where it comes from. It comes from very deep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a merging of all of your senses and of your whole being, but from a very deep inner source. And that's why I feel that, in my case, decades of deep meditation has been the most important source, the most important source that helped me access all of these depths and also the heights.
Mm.
And also basically, it's like it's being in the core of an equilateral cross, balanced this way and balanced that way.
Well, to speak to that, what does it feel like when the inspiration comes to you? Like, do you have an image of a completed painting in your mind, or the image of the light, and how do you work to translate that?
Mm. Well, no. Usually, it comes as a very powerful vision of a particular dimension of reality, and it's entering that reality, and it's a very powerful vision. But then comes the challenge: how do I interpret that? Because it has to go through my own interpretation. I'm not illustrating something. I'm having to incorporate it, embody it, translate it, transform it, and it has to come through me. But it has to be that.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be as true to that as possible. And that always means, of course, never a copy of it, and but an interpretation. But it has to be a very truthful interpretation. So I sometimes see it very clearly. Sometimes I get the message very clearly that this is what you have to do next. And then I'm left without any idea, except now I'm meant to paint what is before the beginning. Paint that which is before the beginning.
And I think I recall the piece you showed me
Yes,
at your home.
Yes. Well, that took 5 months of gestation. Finally, 5 months later, the vision came to help me. Up until then, I had to figure what is it that is meant with that, So I did all kinds of sketches and variations, and just contemplating, meditating, sitting with it, allowing it to emerge. 5 months it took. And finally...
Patience is a virtue, yes.
It was really a hard one. And not the first time and not the last time that this happened. And then when it came, it was absolutely brilliantly clear. Well, of course, it wasn't just the Big Bang, and it wasn't the first word. It isn't biblical, and it's not just scientific. It is actually much more holistic, much more encompassing. And that was what became the painting that I first called Laudatio, which means praise in Latin, but then it had another evolutionary stage, which I had when I reworked it, and now it's Sat, which means true, the existence, the truth. Truth.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the first series in this gallery space is the Sat Chitananda. It's existence, consciousness, bliss.
Mm.
And it relates very much to all three. It's just like that. And the other paintings came from very profound inner experiences, like the Chit, which is consciousness, is very interesting because it had to be felt in the body physically. And it was really hard, really hard. It was really hard because I had to experience the pure, the enormous power of the darkness, the dark itself, as the original dark from which everything first burst forth.
Is void maybe another synonym there, or
it can be described as that, yes, but it's many things. It's many things, but it's in this particular case, I had to experience it physically. And since this is about consciousness, this was consciousness. How does this consciousness actually, this sat consciousness, express itself in the body?
Mm.
And so that was physically very powerful. And then the third one, bliss, had to be, and that was again a series of visions that I had to then translate into a composite, which was again various elements.
You know, sometimes the photographs, when we look at them, and your books have done a great job with reproductions, but sometimes the luminosity of those photographs or reproductions really doesn't shine through with what you see when you're taking in at one of your canvases in person. Can you describe a little bit of the technique and how you work with the medium to gain such luminosity and layer?
Right. That's a very good question, Doug. That was very important to me when I began to paint light. And that was in my early 20s. And I just experimented with everything, like so many young people. Spray paint and different techniques combined.
Mark, I'm so sorry to stop. I hear a fan that just came on. Can we take just a brief pause?
Of course.
And we'll come back to that.
Oh, so
This is one of the quirks I'm working out in my solar system. I can take it out of the audio at the end, but it's best to have a good clean take.
I see.
So
Sure.
maybe we can both meditate on luminosity
All right.
for just a moment or two.
Very good question. I'm so glad you asked that, because that is really key. That's absolutely key to the whole process, because without this technique, there wouldn't be anything. I couldn't do it with the ordinary techniques available.
Well, and you kind of, I mean, both, you're quite studied. I mean, you've been studying art since you were 6, my golly. And
I went to 3 different universities trying to find the right teacher.
yeah. And well, anecdotally, I'll tell you, my mother had a master's in art and great artist in many forms. She did her treatise on rewriting curriculum for grade school to high school art curriculum. Still has a great unpublished manuscript that I want to.
Was she a teacher?
Out there. She did. She taught up at Air Force Academy High School when she had me. And that was quite a prestigious position back in the 70s.
Yes, of course.
But I grew up, with the same thing. I wanted to learn how to draw, and she gave me Gray's Anatomy. I said, well,
No
look
kidding.
there, look
That's
at the book.
Great. Yes, exactly.
So I would practice, I'd learn the muscular systems,
Wonderful.
and
Yeah, right.
never really was happy with my rendering skills. So I found that I could get a much, maybe I was impatient. I got a better result with photography.
Well,
So
of course.
that's where I branched out. But my children, I was beginning to tell you before we started in, my oldest daughter is up in Fort Collins. She's going to art school again, and she's found printmaking and block making. So right now she's doing lino cuts, and is just insanely good at this process. She's very good at drafting and making wonderful renderings and drawings. But there's something that's really caught her gusto with the block prints. Yeah. Anyway, it's nice because I think these older forms are. It's not like they're dropping away, but they're just less prominent these days.
I think
There's so much
making
digital, and
yes, of course.
I just think they'll be sought after.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. I mean, it is. You can't do it with digital. You can do a digital. What would you call it? I mean, all the classical printmaking skills are very manual and very, very handcrafted.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really reproduce it. You can reproduce an effect, but you can't reproduce the qualities that created that particular print the way it did, because
Well, I think the imperfection is part of the beauty there.
yes.
Whereas you might get a technically perfect G-clay print every time. There's a little less, randomness and soul in there.
Yes, I see. Well, I've been having a lot of problems with my wonderful printmaker in Taos, because he can't get certain colors. I mean, the basic colors that are available, um, they look good on the camera, and when he starts to print them, it's not the same thing.
When he's doing his books, is it like an inkjet or a giclée print?
It's ultra
Okay, so he's using like a nice palette of 9 colors.
Exactly.
And he's working with the wide gamut that they can produce there.
Precisely. And
But
he's got this incredible camera that is like something about as big as yours back then, you know.
He's probably shooting in 4x5 or larger. Large format.
He can do very large formats. He is doing prints. I mean, most of his work is actually for books and also for museums. You know. So it's really high, very high quality. I mean, it takes 1 hour to take one photograph of one painting, pixel by pixel by pixel.
Right, to slowly scan it.
Just
That's awesome.
Yes, and it's very accurate, but it's not exactly the same. And as you said, you can't capture the light.
Yeah. You know, I wonder, have you ever done a show with projections? You know, I think you mentioned you did this with James once, where you projected the images and maybe he spoke his poetry.
Yes, we did that too, but no, it was done in a dance performance in a theater in New York.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was fantastic because the stage was like 100 meters, and they actually projected some of these paintings. Also videoed in such a way that the videographer then took certain details and made them much more prominent and moved them, and it was really quite a performance. And they were beautiful. The images came out perfectly at 100 feet.
Get the luminosity with reflected light.
I think it's much better. Yes, it is. Yeah. The moment you put it on paper, it just loses something.
Well, I'd love to collaborate with you in a future projected exhibit.
Oh, wonderful.
That would be really fun.
Let's do that. No, that sounds fantastic. Where do you do that? Where do you do things
well,
like that?
I own a couple of projectors, and I've been a video artist for many years.
I know.
You know, in terms of gallery exhibitions, I haven't really exhibited in galleries since the early 2000s. But, you know, in terms of the technology, I'm a master at that. It'd be really interesting to write a proposal for you to think of where we could do, you know, a projection.
Wow.
A projection exhibit.
You know what? That would be fantastic as a fundraiser for our project.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Couldn't we do that?
Okay, we'll
Let's
shake.
Do it. Oh, yes. Oh, that's great. That's
cool.
Great. And you know what? I have this incredibly great good fortune of having met a woman who lives in Boulder. You will meet her. She's amazing. She is an heiress who has quite a bit of money, but not wealthy, but she is very excited about our project, and she will want to do fundraising. And she has done 3 movies.
Oh, fabulous.
Co-produce or produce 3 movies. All 3 of them are on Sundance. And one of them, and the one you will know, the first one she did, was on the media. What was it called? It's about 15 years ago. Something about the media.
Social Dilemma.
That's it.
We know people in common. I know the filmmaker through John Milton and Way of Nature that did that.
Yes, well, she was the producer for that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes, her name is Virginia Jordan.
Okay.
Virginie Jordan.
It's a small world when you come down to it.
I know it is. I know it. She lives in Boulder. It's an incredible place. And we could do it even in her house. She's a gorgeous big house, you know, big walls. We could do it there as a fundraiser. We could do it wherever. And she wants to do fundraising for us.
Well, you have all the images, and
I have all the images in high resolution.
Yeah, I think the larger they're shown, the better.
Of course.
Well, let's bring this back on track.
Right.
We're back to silence.
All right.
And
Fans off, Doug. Has been for a minute.
Yep, thanks. Perfect. We're going to wrap up with that question. So, Marika, tell me a little bit about the technique or the techniques, let's say, that you involve to create your pieces.
Well, I actually only paint in oil and watercolor. I do a lot of drawing, but I basically only paint, and I am a painter. So what I came upon early on in my 20s was this frustration of how do I really create the light that I'm seeing and that I want. And it took 4 years for me to find the technique that I was looking for. And I was told, you have to paint in the technique of the old masters. The only way you'll ever really get that light is through that technique. And I was told that by a wonderful art connoisseur who became like my mentor. And he said, well, go for it. But how am I going to get the recipe for that technique? This was in the mid-60s.
Well, and what we know is they layered certain...
It's layering, it's glazing. It's called the glaze technique, the Renaissance glaze technique. So anyway, I couldn't find the right mediums. And at that point, there was hardly anything ever written about it. And there was only one art school and one artist in Vienna who also had to teach this technique to himself. But I didn't know at the time that he was already painting in this technique. Even though I was in Munich and he was in Vienna, I should have known. But it took me years to then research and find a recipe that was the right recipe. And it all depends on the proper proportion of the medium that turns an egg emulsion dry pigment into an oil paint. And this particular recipe only took 700 years for the early Renaissance painted, 700. So it was Hugo and Jan van Eyck in 405 to finally find out that actually egg yolk or egg yolk can be mixed with an oil and the water to make it into a oily emulsion. But then how do I make that into an oil paint? So after years and years and years, 700 years, they finally came up with a combination of oil, varnish, and turpentine. And it had to be in the right proportions. And it's like 2 portions of damar varnish, which you have to make yourself out of damar crystals and a good, very high quality turpentine. These damar crystals only come in from Java, and in the earliest 1400s, there wasn't much being imported into Holland yet from Java. So they did the best they could with other things. But this is the medium consists of damar varnish, equal amounts of linseed oil, half of the same amount of stand oil, and that makes 5 parts, and then the equal amount, 5 parts of a high quality turpentine. And if you need, you can put a cicative in it, but that may not be needed. Anyway, so this makes a very, very rich medium, a very fat medium, which you need because the pigment itself is very lean. It's made up of only egg yolk and damar varnish and water. It dries very quickly.
And are the pigments mineral-based or?
They're incredible. It all depends on your source, but there's a fantastic manufacturer called Kremer in Germany who's been producing pigments for almost 100 years. And their variety of pigments is just vast. I mean, 20,
so you'll mix
30.
the medium, mix the pigments, and create...
And you create out of the dry pigment, which can be mineral and the earth pigments, mineral pigments, and also synthetic pigments. They now make synthetic pigments of the highest quality. And so you mix your dry pigment with the emulsion, and then emulsify it and turn it into an oil paint with this medium. And then, of course, you have to have the right everything. Then you have to have the right surface and the right gesso, and then you go layer by layer by layer by layer. Takes a very long time. It takes drying time. Takes a lot of patience, and a lot of technical, investment.
Yeah.
And most people don't have that. Don't really care. But I found that technique, and that is the reason why these paintings, after having 20, 30, 40, 50 layers of pigment, various shades and colors and intensities, layered upon a board. It has to be a board with a very luminous surface. And the final result is a luminosity that will last for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's worth it.
I've been blessed to experience many of your pieces in person. And I hope that many more will be blessed to visit the gallery when it is completed.
I'm certainly hoping that that will be the case, and it's really meant for people who would like to spend time contemplating the art and not be rushed out as in a gallery or in a museum.
Well, and of course, your idea behind this is really like a retreat center, where people would come to have that experience
That's
with
right.
with
That's
art
right.
that is.
That's right. Well, we'll be calling it with Bert Luminous Doorways. The building will have many beautiful luminous doorways, and the subtitle will be A Space to Commune Through Art.
That's beautiful.
Everyone will be welcome when the time comes.
Marika, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you, dear.
I hope to
Doug.
continue the conversation and
It was
collaboration
lovely being
into the
with you.
future.
Thank you. Thank you so much.